former candidate for the U.S. Senate, longtime radio talk show host, author, and conservative policy advocate.
Justices to the Supreme Court, the left has been in open panic.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
President Trump says we've prevailed over COVID-19 and that his is one of the greatest presidencies ever. True or false? Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. The 45th president made a couple of extremely bold claims, even for him this week, and we will examine them. Have we prevailed over this deadly virus? And is the Trump presidency one of the greatest in history? Understanding, of course, that he has anywhere from 8 months to 4.5 years to go. Do these claims ring true or not? And does the sheer audacity of these declarations help or hurt arguably the most controversial president in American history? And will they propel him to victory or ensure his defeat in November? We'll discuss how the enthusiasm gap, or chasm really, between Trump and Joe Biden represents a major challenge for Trump's presumptive opponent. Also, in this sports-starved nation and world, we stand on the precipice of the first reopening, Major League Baseball. But as always, money stands in the way, and the toxic remarks of one tone-deaf star pitcher have created a firestorm, which we'll discuss with a fellow seamhead, that means a huge baseball fan, and LibertyNation.com economics correspondent Andrew Moran. Plus, LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza joins us to examine threats and promising developments regarding your individual liberty and talkin' liberty. And we mourn the death of an old friend.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We commence the proceedings with our signature segment, Say What?, where we roll out a virtual assembly line of wacky, astonishing, damnable, and ultimately revealing things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. Joe Biden is leading in the polls, most all of the polls, as Election Day approaches in just over 5 months. And later on, we'll discuss exactly how much that means or doesn't mean this far out from the election. But if President Trump fails to win re-election, it won't be because he wasn't out in front of the voters enough or not sufficiently promoting himself. Okay, that's an understatement. He has, of course, been, if anything, overexposed during the pandemic, which begs another one of those simple questions with a complicated answer. Will the daily exposure and amplification of him during this crisis ultimately help or hurt President Trump? Will the voters see him as a take-charge guy who, by most accounts, has done at least a decent job handling a sudden, deadly crisis threatening the world? Or will they say, enough of this guy? 4 years of him is enough. Now, Trump is well known for his braggadocio. We all know that. And we often don't take him literally so much as seriously, but there were 2 bold claims he made this week that deserve to be evaluated, to say the least. Here's the first about the coronavirus.
In every generation, through every challenge and hardship and danger, America has risen to the task. We have met the moment, and we have prevailed.
We have met the moment and prevailed. Have we? Or have we allowed too many to die? Or have we, on the other hand, gone too far in compromising our liberties and crippling the economy for as far as the eye can see? Talk to 100 random people and you get 100 equally earnest yet different answers. But sure enough, atop the list of issues the voters care about is one they'd never even heard of when this year began, the pandemic. And when Trump said we have prevailed, while he later explained he was most specifically referring to prevailing on testing, he went one big step further in another public statement this week, which doubled as a reminder of all the slings and arrows he's dodged from his enemies on the left.
What they've done to the presidency and what they've done to this country can never be allowed to happen again to our country. And despite all of that has been done, everything that's been done, We've had one of the greatest presidencies ever. Nobody's accomplished what we've accomplished in a relatively short period of time.
We've had one of the greatest presidencies ever, despite the nonstop attacks of the left. True or false? Well, as Bill Clinton might say, it depends what the meaning of economy is. Meaning Trump would certainly get credit for the robust economy of the first 3 years of his presidency, but now that the bottom has dropped out of the economy, will he any longer get credit for where it was until the pandemic? Will he ultimately be blamed for over 40 million lost jobs, even if many of those are restored before the election? Because in the end, it happened on his watch. And people will want to make a clean break from this pandemic? Or will the voters believe that things would have actually been worse if the economy had been weak when the virus hit, and that if Trump did so much for the economy once, he can do it again? Joe Biden is hardly a candidate who's inspired confidence, and we'll deal with his many issues a bit later in the show. But perhaps the biggest challenge Trump faces is that this time around, the voters don't dislike his opponent more than him, according to widely respected veteran political forecaster Charlie Cook.
Of the people that have an unfavorable view of both Donald Trump and Joe Biden, how do they break on the trial heat? And Biden is ahead 49-18 among the people that dislike both of them, while they cut by a 20-point margin against Hillary Clinton. It's not just that President Trump's unfavorables are sky high, but that they look like they're going to bite him, and that Biden is just not in the same place that Hillary Clinton was at this point. And, you know, we'll see about November.
So Biden is more likable than Hillary. That's a low bar. Rest assured, though, Trump will come at Biden with everything he's got, and it's a lot, and will undoubtedly drive down Biden's favorability considerably. But that statement by Cook points to another version of that same question from before. Is Trump a president people want to come in and mow down a few big targets and then split after 4 years because that's all the day in, day out pitched melodrama they can take? Or do they know that he needs to be given 8 years in order to achieve what has been, lest we forget, an incredibly ambitious agenda of major structural change right down to the foundations of the permanent bureaucracy, which has now been repeatedly discredited and disgraced, thanks to Donald Trump? We close with a couple of truly head-shaking comments, one from politics, the other from sports. First, Nancy Pelosi. She has fired every bullet in her chamber at President Trump, or so we thought. But after years of attacking his character, his beliefs, his record, this week in joining her leftist cohorts in attacking the president for using hydroxychloroquine, the anti-malaria drug which has helped some people recover from COVID-19, old Nancy expressed her deep concern for Trump's physical condition.
He's our president, and I would rather he not be taking something that has not been approved by the scientists, especially in his age group and in his, shall we say, weight group, what is morbidly obese, they say.
Morbidly obese, they say. Next thing, they'll say he's a full-on white supremacist. Oh, I forgot. They already used that one. And now to get you set for our next segment, we present the remarks of a star Major League pitcher, arguably the most tone-deaf remarks I've heard almost ever. With Major League Baseball doing all it can to work a deal to get some kind of season, Blake Snell of the Tampa Bay Rays, he of a $7 million annual salary, threw cold water on the whole thing because it's all about the Benjamins.
Y'all gonna be like, bro, Blake, play for the love of the game, man. What's wrong with you, bro? Money should not be a thing. Bro, I'm risking my life. What do you mean it should not be a thing? It 100% should be a thing. If I'm gonna play, I should be getting the money I signed to be getting paid. I should not be getting half of what I'm getting paid because the season's cut in half, on top of a 33% cut of the half that's already there. So I'm really getting like 25%. On top of that, it's getting taxed. So imagine how much I'm actually making to play. You know what I'm saying? No, I got to get my money. I'm not playing unless I get mine.
I'm risking my life, like regular people making a whole lot less than $7 million a year aren't. And no, I got to get my money. I'm not playing unless I get mine. All I can say is when baseball does resume, Blake Snell should be on his knees in gratitude that there won't be any fans in the stands, because if there were, he'd be booed out of probably every stadium, including his home ballpark. And he will now forever live in infamy. But there is real hope that baseball will break the ice and be the first sport to resume within the next 6 weeks or so. Negotiations between owners and players are reaching a critical stage this weekend, and we'll evaluate where things stand when we return.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
In a nation where some 39 million people have lost their jobs over the last 2 months, a nation starving for a return to something at least approaching normalcy, we can now see like a beacon in the night, somewhere between the near and distant horizon, finally, a return to America's national pastime, as Major League Baseball engages in serious discussions to begin a shortened season in stadiums with no fans by July 1st. But as we've witnessed so many times over the years, money stands in the way, with billionaire owners and multimillionaire players fighting over a pie that's going to be a lot smaller than usual. And the remarkably tone-deaf remarks of one star pitcher have everyone hot and bothered as negotiations between players and owners reach a critical stage over this Memorial Day weekend. Joining us to sort all this out is fellow seamhead, i.e., huge baseball fan, who serves as LibertyNation.com economics correspondent in his spare time, Andrew Moran. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I wanted to put...
Also, to all our viewers, I'm a big Red Sox fan.
Okay, and I'm a big Mets fan. So full disclosure here, and we're not going to bring up the 1986 World Series, which the Mets beat the Red Sox in. We're not going to bring that up. So, Andrew, I played the comments of Blake Snell in the first segment of the program. They are disturbing at best. It seems like in the past, the owners were more the bad guys during the several work stoppages, including the one that canceled the 1994 World Series. But have those remarks by Blake Snell, backed up by no less than superstar Bryce Harper, plus all manner of union officials, tipped public sentiment toward the owners who appear to be doing all they can to get a season?
Well, I think the public sentiment is split into two groups. I think the first are the diehard fans who have a connection with a lot of the players, especially the fans who pay attention to the farm system and the minor league system and see players climb through the ranks and finally make the major league roster. They care about the players. They want to see them healthy. At the same time, they still want to see them, play ball, but they don't want them to get sick. The other are the casual fans who just want to watch baseball, no matter the cost, regardless of what the players think and all the jazz. I'm personally stuck in the middle because I would love to see baseball, but then I read Joe Schaefer's excellent report about what MLB wants to do. They want to ban high fives. They don't want to have spinning. They want to have the base coaches, distant from the players. And then the biggest thing are taking the fans out of the equation. They're not going to be at the ballpark, which is it's a huge component of the viewing experience. I mean, imagine watching Game 7 of the World Series without anybody in the stands watching, incredible, bottom of the ninth, 2 outs. It's a 1-run game. Someone's in the scoring position. It really takes away from the pleasure of the game. But I understand a lot of these players, they have families. Their shelf life is in professional sports is about a decade. They want to maximize their earnings, so they don't want to get sick. If they get sick from coronavirus, or they're missing a season because of it. Whatever the case, they're going to be damaged in the long run. It's a lose-lose situation for everybody. I don't envy anybody who has to make these decisions.
It sounds to me like you're saying, Andrew, that it may not even be worth playing a season with all the restrictions that would be imposed by Major League Baseball.
Yeah, again, Joe Shaver has a comprehensive list of everything that MLB wants to ban. So, it's not worth it. You get half a season maybe, and then if you make the postseason, there's a second wave, then you're not going to get how great October baseball is.
Well, now this may be a bit dramatic, Andrew, but can baseball survive as a major sport if it can't figure out a way to get back to work here when tens of millions of people are counting on them to break the spell of this pandemic and liberate them from isolation and despair?
Well, it's been said for so long how baseball is a dying sport. The famous line, the rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated. Attendance has been down for 6 of the last 7 seasons. You have that huge black eye from the Houston Astros scandal. You have, Rob Manfred constantly risking alienating diehard fans. So from a big business standpoint, the only optimistic trend to be excited about in baseball are the high television ratings. But either way, if baseball has a season or has to wait until next year, it'll be the same situation as it is now. If you look at some of the other sports leagues, or I shouldn't call it sports leagues, but let's say you look at the WWE, for instance. The WWE has been operating the same way as it did before, except it hasn't had any fans. But if you look at the television ratings, they've crashed, they've collapsed to all-time lows. So you have the opportunity to escape from the whole doldrums of the coronavirus, but it's not translating to everything. People don't really care. People want to see the way it was, the fans in attendance, the excitement and all that stuff. But you wrote a great article a few weeks ago talking about how, in the post-coronavirus world, people are going to value their things differently in life. So perhaps in our new post-coronavirus world, people may not value sports as much as they used to because they had a long break from it. Now, I value baseball very much, so perhaps I'm not in that equation. But for perhaps the casual people who they watch baseball, in their spare time and don't really care if it survives or not, I don't think they're going to watch right now if baseball were to return on their television screens.
Well, I have to say, Andrew, if there was a year for both of us to skip, this might be the one, because the Mets have lost their number 2 starter to Tommy John surgery, and the Red Sox are famously in a retooling or rebuilding stage. So if this year's lost, it wouldn't be maybe the worst thing for your team or mine. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
LibertyNation.com economics correspondent Andrew Moran.
Where can you find honest political commentary? With sobering analysis.
Even the most trusting among us may find a company's latest plans deeply intrusive.
Accountability.
Perhaps it's time to start asking the right questions.
Deconstructing threats to our liberty.
Unparalleled insight into important stuff.
And boldly reporting the truth. Truth is making a comeback.
Well, hello again, and welcome to Election 2020 Roundtable.
Uprising podcast of LibertyNation.com.
Abortion is functionally sexist.
From my cold, dead hand.
Subscribe to LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, where facts matter.
Click on youtube.com/LibertyNation.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
We're told these days that Joe Biden is ahead of President Trump in virtually every measurement of voter preferences and is leading in most all of those treasured swing states. The polls capturing this snapshot in time do indeed paint a rosy picture for the former vice president. And while even many Democrats discount polls 6 months out, especially after their apocalypse 4 years ago, the raw numbers would seem to provide ample reason for optimism. And yet, do people who follow politics with any degree of seriousness truly accept that Joe Biden is cruising to the decisive victory the polls seem to indicate? Well, you know the answer to that. Of course not. We can enumerate the many ways Joe Biden is deficient as a candidate, but history has proven that arguably the most reliable indicator of a candidate's chances is the degree of enthusiasm for him and the election itself among the party faithful, or more broadly, among those who self-define as party members. Unbeknownst to most and buried in the crosstabs of a broader poll is evidence of a yawning chasm between the incumbent and challenger when it comes to voter enthusiasm. Sarah Cowgill of LibertyNation.com captured it in a recent article when she wrote, "What really points to dismay and apathy within the Democratic Party itself are these dismal numbers forecast on April 29th. 75% of Republicans are enthusiastic about the Trump-Biden matchup, while for Democrats, it's 57%. That's an 18-point difference in enthusiasm. Think about that. For more than 4 years, Democrats have gone scorched earth on Donald Trump, doing everything within their power and often outside the law to expedite his forcible removal from office. And yet, when it comes down to actually putting their money where their mouths have been since Trump rode down that escalator, now that they're forced to take him down the old-fashioned way through the ballot box, they don't just settle on a candidate who not long ago was a laughingstock and still is in many quarters. No, they actually coerce every other legitimate contender into departing the presidential race so they can clear-cut a path to the nomination for this two-time early dropout presidential loser. How exactly can Democrats expect their voters to get fired up when the best they can say about their presidential candidate is, well, at least he's not Trump? In fact, if you dive one layer deeper, you see that the enthusiasm number for Biden among Democrats, 57%, is almost identical to the disapproval number for Trump over the course of his presidency. Putting those two results together, one gets the overriding impression that the only Democrats excited about this race are those who want Trump gone at any cost. More significantly, this all reveals zero excitement about their candidate or the election itself beyond the prospect of vanquishing Trump. There's simply nothing approaching the level of enthusiasm for Joe Biden engendered by virtually every winning candidate in modern political history. Of course, it doesn't help that the former vice president has publicly demonstrated a neurological descent which is unmistakable and presumably irreversible, or that Biden himself was unmasked for his request to unmask the now exonerated Michael Flynn, and Biden's almost certain to be named again in the final report on Obama Justice Department irregularities from Attorney General William Barr, or that his campaign has repeatedly demonstrated an alarming incompetence, unable to pull off even relatively simple online events during the shutdown. Biden's problems are exacerbated by the increasing intransigence of these blue state governors on reopening the economy. It's going to hurt him big time. It's certainly hurtful to the party's credibility. And so is the party's decision to send forth a succession of prominent leftist women to go full-on hypocrite, jumping to Joe Biden's defense over the Tara Reade affair. In fact, at this point, the Me Too hypocrisy is screaming so loudly we can hardly remember the Reade accusation itself. Stacey Abrams, that sparkling twinkle in progressive eyes, who's openly campaigning for vice president and who was totally down with hashtag believe all women, has done a full 180 to hashtag believe Biden. This after the accusations out of left field by Christine Blasey Ford, transparently designed to take down a Supreme Court justice at the 11th hour, were swallowed whole cloth by Democrats with zero attempt to corroborate what turned out to be a 100% uncorroborated tale. Other vice presidential wannabes, Liz Warren, Kamala Harris, want nothing to do with Ms. Reid's allegations. Senator Warren calls Biden's denials credible and convincing, while Senator Harris has refused to comment altogether. And then there's the latest Democrat heartthrob and VP hopeful who's garnered considerable publicity during the pandemic, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. We talked about her in the first segment. Don't worry, she didn't leave the reservation either, saying, quote, "The Joe Biden I know, these stories are inconsistent with what I know and what I've seen in terms of work that he's done to support women," unquote. If, as some on the left have understandably claimed, Tara Reade's coming out at just the right time was privately bankrolled by conservatives, it was undoubtedly as much an investment in exposing naked hypocrisy on the left as it was a serious accusation likely to be pursued by the Biden-friendly elite media. It's no small matter that the left is now vacating its insistence that all women alleging sexual misconduct must be instantly and automatically believed. It hardly stokes enthusiasm among the party's hard left base, which is already demoralized by the withdrawal of Bernie Sanders and highly dissatisfied with Joe Biden as the party's standard bearer. But torpedoes be damned, the left will still advance what should be called the GOP exception. If the accuser is a conservative instead of a leftist, then there simply are no standards for the accused to uphold. So that will apparently settle the issue. But surely there must be some reasons for enthusiasm over the Biden candidacy? Well, based on a generous cross-section of pro-Biden talking heads dotting the airwaves these days, it appears Democrats will try to make their stand on repeating over and over that Joe Biden is a swell guy, a family man oozing with compassion because of his own suffering, and a terrific husband and father. All admirable qualities, if true. But there's one major problem with putting forward the former vice president's supposed character traits in lieu of his record, his ideology, or his vision. Being a compassionate guy who loves his family and has been through trials in his life does not distinguish him from millions of other Americans. And it certainly doesn't qualify a man to become leader of the free world. And this week, the New York Times even admitted Biden is on the other side of the hill. One of their most vicious anti-Trump op-ed writers, Frank Bruni, wrote the following: "Please tell me why I should care whether Joe Biden is declining mentally when President Donald Trump bottomed out morally long ago." New York Times stipulating that Joe Biden is declining mentally as he seeks to become the president of the United States. And you wonder why there's so little enthusiasm on the left? Enthusiasm is the mother's milk of politics. It leads people to become informed, to advocate for their candidate, and wait in long lines and in bad weather to vote. Perhaps that's why Democrats are putting up a brave front in trying to claim that Joe Biden's current standing in the polls points to his inevitable ascension to the Oval Office. Of course, that's exactly what they said about Hillary Clinton. And we'll be back with Talkin' Liberty.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now we welcome you to the portion of Liberty Nation Radio, which we entitle, as always, Talkin' Liberty. It's when we reveal afresh our constitutional lawyer, LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, regular contributor, and our guardian of individual liberty, Scott David Cosenza.
Tim, I hope you love saying it. I love hearing it. Thank you, and it's good to be here.
It's sort of a plus-some game.
It brightens up my day like a Christmas present.
I love to say it, and you love to hear it. What could be better? Let's start with Michael Flynn. What's new?
Wow, there's a lot there. I think the one thing to take away in terms of news is that his legal team has now appealed Judge Sullivan's decision to call for briefs in opposition to the motion for the Justice Department to withdraw the charges. And it seems like Judge Sullivan has acted outside the bounds of sort of normal practice for federal judges. Whether that is unconstitutional or not is a bit it hasn't been ruled on, Tim. But I think that the pro-liberty forces would all say that it is unconstitutional what he's done. And he's applied now to a higher court for relief.
In looking at the accusations against Michael Flynn, is there any legitimate reason for this judge to believe that justice has not been served or that it's been denied by Michael Flynn having the charges dropped against him?
Tim, I think that that's a bad question to pose, and the reason why is it's not for the judge to determine. That is a function of the executive. Our system of limited and enumerated powers and the division of powers and checks and balances that we often talk about, it is the decision of so the legislature defines what it will be crimes as they pass laws, and it's up to the executive function to enforce those criminal laws. They make all kinds of decisions about whom to prosecute and why. Now, the authority that the judge has to approve or not the decision not to prosecute, the reason why that was ensconced in the law, Tim, is to protect accused peoples. I read a very interesting blog post about this by Tim Lynch, who is a constitutional scholar on the Federalist's blog, and he talks about how this was designed as a protection so that if the government were going to charge you and then remove those charges and then refile them, you would have the protection of the judge perhaps saying, well, let's only dismiss them with prejudice, so they couldn't be refiled. In other words, it was a protection against government overreach.
Right.
We don't have anywhere in American jurisprudence some kind of judicial protection against somebody not being charged with a crime. Judges, if they want to go ahead and be U.S. attorneys, they can probably get that job depending on who's in the administration. I suspect Judge Sullivan would have to wait for a Democrat president to be a U.S. attorney because he seems to be practicing like a Democrat judge, with his actions in the Flynn case.
Political considerations are penetrating the judicial system to a degree that I think none of us have probably witnessed before.
You can imagine how the leftists, Tim, would howl if this were, instead of a convenient punching bag, an underprivileged defendant in like an urban setting.
He must have done something that's worthy of keeping him in a cage.
These things that have been done to Michael Flynn, they're done all the time to lesser defendants.
Right.
And by lesser, I mean in terms of their status in society.
Right.
We're just not exposed to them because when those people talk about the charging of their children or the threats to charge their children, those things don't make the front page like it does when it's Mr. Flynn.
Let's move to Texas, where the Supreme Court has heard its first mail-in ballot case, the first of what are going to be many in the months ahead leading up to the election.
That's right. And I didn't think that this was necessarily a particularly important of the 50 states, Tim, ballot issues, but I just think that we need to talk about it in some regard and just pick one, throw a dart at it. The Ken Paxton, the state's attorney general, filed for a writ asking the state's high court to stop 5 of the county's election officials from telling voters they can vote by mail by checking the disability box. But you need a reason to vote by. They have to have one of several delineated legal reasons to not vote in person. And they're saying you don't have to, just check the disability box. But it's not a disability if you don't have, a fear of catching an illness is not a disability. According to the Republicans. Seems like the Democrats want the opposite, which is that everybody can vote. And I think that we're going to see these battles, just every place that there are really contested elections.
I won't speak to the intentions of those who seek more rather than less mail-in ballots because I can't get in their heads. But I can tell you there's nothing more ripe for voter fraud than mail-in ballots when in this kind of situation. And everybody knows it, of course. Now, 2 cases for economic freedoms were reinstated by state Supreme Courts this week.
I think this is really good news for liberty, Tim. In both of these cases, these actors were basically bullied by state governments because they didn't have these occupational licensing that often are so onerous, and they're put up as a barrier to competition rather than some genuine effort at maintaining, the health and welfare of the populace. And I think it was in Georgia, there was a lactation consultant, and I think in Pennsylvania there was somebody who was like an Airbnb type manager. And in both instances, the state required them to get all this licensing. I forget what the lactation consultant was supposed to get, but the Airbnb person, they said they were basically being a real estate agent without a license, and they weren't selling anything. They were just managing some Airbnbs. Anyway, the lower state courts dismissed those claims. They haven't decided in favor of those litigants, but they've said we will hear the cases, and that is an important win, I think, that they're actually going to hear them. Sadly, the federal courts have treated economic liberty as a kind of redheaded stepchild. If there's a free speech case, it's one thing, but an economic liberty case is another. So it's good to see some movement in the state courts on this front.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
Now, I want you to stick around because we're going to do something different. I want to mourn the death of an old friend. I want to read this because it's an obituary printed in the London Times, and I think it speaks to where we are today. Today we mourn the passing of a beloved old friend, Common Sense, who had been with us for many years. No one knows for sure how old he was since his birth records were long ago lost in bureaucratic red tape. He'll be remembered as having cultivated such valuable lessons as knowing when to come in out of the rain, why the early bird gets the worm, life isn't always fair, and maybe it was my fault. Common sense lived by simple, sound financial policies, don't spend more than you can earn, and reliable strategies. Adults, not children, are in charge. His health began to deteriorate rapidly when well-intentioned but overbearing regulations were set in place. Reports of a 6-year-old boy charged with sexual harassment for kissing a classmate, teens suspended from school for using mouthwash after lunch, and a teacher fired for reprimanding an unruly student only worsened his condition. Common sense lost ground when parents attacked teachers for doing the job that they themselves had failed to do in disciplining their unruly children. It declined even further when schools were required to get parental consent to administer sun lotion or an aspirin to a student, but could not inform parents when a student became pregnant and wanted to have an abortion. Common sense lost the will to live as the churches became businesses and criminals received better treatment than their victims. Common sense took a beating when you couldn't defend yourself from a burglar in your own home and the burglar could sue you for assault. Common sense finally gave up the will to live after a woman failed to realize that a steaming cup of coffee was hot. She spilled a little in her lap and was promptly awarded a huge settlement. Common sense was preceded in death by his parents, truth and trust, by his wife, discretion, by his daughter, responsibility, and by his son, reason. He is survived by 5 stepchildren. I know my rights. I want it now. Someone else is to blame. I'm a victim. And, the littlest one, pay me for doing nothing. Not many attended the funeral of Common Sense because so few realized he was gone. If you still remember him, pass this on. If not, join the majority and do nothing. Think about it. That's where we are today. We'll be back with you next week. In the meantime, stand up for liberty, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.